Yeah, Vijeta, we start now. You're live.
Yes, sir. We are live, sir. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So, good evening, everybody. If you are in India, and good afternoon, Mr. Reinhold, if you are in Germany, and good day to everybody else from across the world who joined in. We're, on behalf of IoT Forum, this is T.R. Anand. I am the present chair of the IoT Forum, and we have an exciting session coming up today. I would just take a few minutes to introduce the IoT Forum and its purpose and initiatives for a few minutes, and then I'll hand over to Arvind. Okay, so the IoT Forum is a think tank to raise the IoT quotient, and it was started way back in 2020. So this is our 7th year. It is a part of the Indus Entrepreneurs, TiE Bangalore, and I am a board member of TiE Bangalore. Several of us, charter members, are key persons here. Arvind, who was the chairperson of IoT Forum till very recently, he is now our chair emeritus, and he has been guiding the formation and execution of all our initiatives. So IoT Forum today is a very vibrant community, and we support over 2,000 startups in the entire IoT matrix space. So initially it may have been just the sensors at the edge, but now it's all encompassing, covering everything from the edge, AI, ML, computer vision, AR, VR, the entire works, and it now encompasses the entire space of the digital IoT space. And here you're here today to discuss. We run a number of events every month, 2 or 3 events, and this is the first one for July today. We have an industrial IoT day, a full day event coming up on August 7th. And we have our flagship event, the IoT Matrix, on December 3rd and 4th. It's held every year. So these are our major events that we do. we build community. So we're building the startup community here through a number of initiatives, programs like these. We also help bring startups together with corporates who may be interested in their technology and absorption. We also enable dialogue with fund management, be it AIMBuilds or VCs. And this helps to build a thriving community. We are fully automated on Telegram, and you will see the Telegram vibrant channel as well as the group that we put out in the chat sometime. So without further ado, that's about the IoT Forum, very vibrant community. So all of you listeners who may be startups or who may be contemplating a startup, do look us up and join and be a part of this community. With that, I will now hand over to Arvind. All of you in the panelists know Arvind quite well, but just to basically give a 2-line introduction to him. He has been the architect as chair and founder of the IoT Forum 2014 onwards, and really built up the entire vibrant community and a thought leadership in terms of how to structure. So we have over 10 special interest groups and over 100 volunteers today. It's entirely volunteer-led organization. Okay, so I think we definitely are we must all be very appreciative and thankful to Arvind for putting this up. As you most know, he's done startups, he's been in corporate, he has an educational, what I would call grounding from IIT Kanpur, IIM Ahmedabad, and Wharton. Okay, so with that, I will hand over to Arvind to introduce the panel and moderate this discussion. Over to you, Arvind.
Thanks, Anand. And I thank everyone here to join on a Monday evening, and look forward to a session which will cover, as you might have seen in the invite, we are covering cold chain-led supply chain. Basically, we are looking at refrigerated stuff, blood, vaccines, perishables, food, fisheries, etc. and what is happening and what will happen. The surge required due to COVID, we all know there's a capacity issue and there are delays. We don't have enough vaccines. We don't have enough short supply. And the supply is in all sorts of areas. It's not just urban centers. It has to go to tier 2, tier 3. It's a worldwide problem. And what does it mean? And will it occur again? So those are the panelists. So what we are going to do, this session will run a little longer because we have 7 panelists and each one has very interesting topics to talk about. So for the audience, my suggestion is that we will do a few, I will outline what we are going to do, but the interesting questions and sessions will come more towards the end. So it's only about 7 that the more interesting sessions will start. So I would request you to pay attention and you can put it in the chat window, your questions. I will first ask each one of the panelists to talk for about 4 or 5 minutes about themselves, about their role and their landscape. How do they see the entire supply chain and what is the good areas and what are the weak areas? Then we will take 3 questions and I will ask 1 or 2 members to talk about each of these questions. The first question will be, how do we reduce wastage? I don't know if you're aware, 30 to 50% wastage is quite common for various reasons and at various parts in the supply chain. And this is not a business where there's a lot of margin. Supply chain doesn't run on very large margins. So it is a very large part of the issue. How can we reduce it by 50%? Now, 50% is just off my air, like a startup. No, you just put some number. I have no engineering. And we will see some of you try to give examples and answers around that. Then we will take the second question. How do we reduce lead times to deliver by 30, 50? And the lead time is important. I think in e-commerce, we know Amazon, Flipkart, everyone, Tencent and Alibaba, everyone delivers next day. And this is an expectation anywhere. The moment you are not getting next day, most people don't buy it, go somewhere else. Now, delivering next day requires a tremendous re-engineering. And it's not just ordinary goods. It's also things which are large, small, all sorts of things are now getting delivered. I mean, if you look at China, 60% of the deliverables can Alibaba's logistics does. I mean, it's bigger than the Chinese post or the Chinese government. I mean, just the scale of the logistics delivery network being done, and UPS can talk about how much money comes from Amazon or doesn't come, but it is a very large part of the issue. Does that come to supply chain? Do we want for cold chain? Do we want our refrigerated medicines to be fast? Do we want things fast delivery? Do we expect same-day delivery, etc.? So that is the second question. How do we reduce lead times to deliver by 30 to 50%? And the last one is the larger one, because what is happening is we are living in a volatile, uncertain world, and demand surges. Like if you do Diwali Dhamaka, as we all know, supply volumes will go double or triple. And that's a very big surge, and you still have to deliver within 1 or 2 days. And during pandemic, the vaccine surge is about 5 to 10 times larger. Now, supply chain does not have spare capacity sitting. It's not like AWS or Azure that you can click and they have more servers added. And it's expensive. These are physical goods, and you need to have trains, you need to have cars, you need to have refrigerated vans, you need to have all that. So how do you pay for this capex, but still reduce the OPEX cost? When you rent it for surge price, it is still low. And that is how you create an utilization. You deliver, and then you are returning. Is it empty? Is it used for something else? So those are the questions that will be in the third one. And then we will have a little bit of connection. And then I will take questions and answers from all of you. Please put it in the chat window and we will take. So with that, I will start with the introduction part, which is Pavnesh Kohli. Yes, sir. Please go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself.
Good day. I'm Pavnesh Kohli, former founding CEO of the National Center for Cold Chain Development, Chief Advisor to Ministry of Agriculture and Supply Chain. And I think I'll put some perspective on cold chain requirements and some errors and omissions around its understanding as part of my introduction. Number one, the supply chain in any space is the material management of both inputs and outputs. Cold chain is the management of the post-production phase once value has been created, and that value needs to be communicated to market in controlled ambience. Usually the cold chain is held synonymous, often and wrongly, merely with cooling, or even worse, with in-situ storage in refrigerated stores. Actually, at core, since it handles perishables and destroyable goods, it's about inventory in motion under controlled ambient conditions. That's where the digitalization of the supply chain helps. Often I keep hearing words like digital agriculture or digital cold chain. That's a misnomer. It's about material management. It's about the digitalization of processes. So mere focus of cooling is never sufficient. I heard Mr. Tiwari talk about food wastage. We must understand that cooling and refrigeration does not stop any form of food loss or food wastage. It is consumption that stops losses. So cold chain is about delivering goods. Concepts like JIT in supply chain and always working around a time distance matrix are but natural in the cold chain. On the topic of food loss and waste, I must mention here, because when one is articulating these concepts, and when those of you who want to participate in the cold chain, the supply chain which handles perishables, you must be very clear-headed around these concepts. Food loss is what the supply chain addresses, because loss is like an electricity transmission loss, distribution losses. Waste is in the hands of consumers. You switch on your lights and leave them open, that's wasteful behavior. Supply chain does not go around changing behavioral patterns of consumers. Supply chain looks inwards to see what they can do better to make sure that their own activities contributes to a longer holding life, marketable life of the produce, ensures part of that marketable life of the produce reaches shelf, hence ergo shelf life. It can be kitchen shelf or a retail shelf. So reaching the terminal destination is the most important part, and all solutions should be focused on that. Behavioral losses are something else we can talk about later if I have to come in on that topic. Otherwise, it's a different ballgame. We must also have, there is another logic, by the way, to talk about food loss more than food waste, or loss in the logistics chain rather than wastage in the hand. Globally, 22% of food is only wasted, and almost 80% is the food, 78% is the food which is lost in transit. Even in America, the last report by FAO is around, I understand I'm running short of time, is about 115 kilograms per capita is wastage, but 181 kilograms per capita is the loss in transit. You must also understand that when we're talking about cold chain, there's an opportunity to converge their applications. That only brings about a sustainable approach. So if you have a farm to fork model for food movement, say vaccines or medicines or snake venom has to move to rural areas, they can also, the source of the food chain can also become the terminal destination of the healthcare system. That's where convergence happens and more solutions are created. Want to insist, technology is not a solution, it facilitates a solution. Proviso, it is applied with an outcome in mind. We can talk more. Cold chain is a topic I could have probably spoken on for an hour on this, but that's for the introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavnesh. Shankara.
Good morning, everybody. Rather, it's morning for me, so good evening, everybody. My name is Shankara Kuppa. I am a lead OR analyst in United Parcel Service, or UPS, which better known as. It is my privilege to be part of such a distinguished panel today, discussing a pivotal set of topics that influence how we as a society are going to function in the next few years, honestly speaking. And I'm really excited about what we'll learn today. I began my quest in analytics in the logistics industry with a PhD from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, working with UPS on how we route our packages in the middle mile. And then after that, I went into the railroad industry for about a decade and a half, where I held roles ranging from analytics to service planning and last mile delivery, and from a railroad perspective. And last year, I got back to the mothership, UPS, and now we are focusing on last mile delivery within the road network and the like. fundamentally, we are working on state-of-the-art algorithms in OR, operations research, AI, ML type algorithms, all for helping in delivery operations. A little bit about UPS. We are a global leader in logistics, at the forefront and at the cutting edge of a majority of what we are designing, and both in terms of business solutions and supply chains. The recent spotlight on vaccine transportation and UPS's successful handling of the rollout has been pretty well covered in the media. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to point them in the right direction. Just one quick disclaimer. Almost everything I'm saying right now is my personal opinion and is not meant to be really representative of what UPS as a company does.
Noted. Thanks.
Just one last thing, if you don't mind. Yeah. From a cold chain perspective, my background being from AI and ML, I foresee a lot of, for good, reliable decisions to be made, we need good quality data to come out from these models. And for this, we need to really focus on the quality of the data. I think some of the other panelists are going to go into the details there, but that would be one of my major area of focus, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Reinhold?
Yeah, my name is Reinhold Hamann from Bosch in Germany. I'm a mechanical engineer working for the mobility division in Bosch. Mobility division is by far the biggest one of Bosch, dealing with all these automotive components. You may ask yourself, what do these guys want to do in logistics? On one hand, we buy services, logistics services, for 1.5 billion euros per year. And on the other hand, we want to do more than supplying components for cars. We want to do more services with cars, services with logistics for moving goods. And the reason why we think that we can do there something, and we already do quite a lot of business in there, is we are the biggest sensor manufacturer of the world, and you need in logistics a lot of sensors. And in the recent years, we built up a substantial know-how in data handling, especially artificial intelligence of our own data and data of customers, and as well blockchain. And we think that these complicated networks of the logistics in the future, and as well for cold chains, can only be sorted out with huge partner networks, which you cannot handle with simply one database. You need collaborative databases and good algorithms to really optimize that across several companies, across several parties. And you have to have a very trustful data access rules, not only for the involved companies, but as well for every customer and every consumer who really is a receiver of the cold chain goods. And for this, building up trust is some specialty of our company. That's the background and the teaser in the moment.
Thanks, Reinhold. Then Shiv Kumar.
Hi, everyone. This is Shiv Kalyanaraman.
Just for you guys, Microsoft has a policy work away from home. He's using it fully.
Thank you, Arvind. So from my beach, hello to everyone. So I serve as the CTO for Energy and Mobility for Microsoft Azure, our cloud business. So I have worked in equal parts, both in the IT industry as well as in areas like clean energy, mobility. And so my role is to define what we call the industry platform as a service capabilities for Microsoft, as Microsoft is helping our customers go deeper into industry and bring these capabilities at a higher order, set of abstractions to help accelerate the digitization. So this is a very important topic. We're talking about cold chain, and one of the central problems is of waste of perishable goods, of time and services, of capital, of energy, broadly waste of resources, right? And how do you reduce it? And my colleagues have set the stage very well earlier on. So fundamentally, we believe that you need situational awareness of what's going on, both of the customer. It was mentioned that the waste is happening at the customer side or in transit. The significant amount of waste can happen in transit, right? And and at the same time, in addition to the situational awareness, rich situational awareness, which then can inform just-in-time and real-time orchestration. So these are the two major challenges that we see that the industry has to, go and beyond just track and trace and beyond the first generation set of technologies. So what we see as the opportunity is the ability for entities that are participating. You're dealing with multiple entities which need to share data, syndicate data in a controlled way, collaborate seamlessly. And of course, moving from traditional basic sensors to next generation sensors, including visual sensors, the ability to process data on the edge itself, and also potentially modify behaviors of different participants so that paired with incentives or positive nudges, right? And at the same time, this is all powered through finance, offering things as a service so that capital can flow in most efficient ways, right? So we see the role of IT, of the cloud, of AI, of IoT as critical all the way from digitizing paper to digital so that you avoid basic wastage or simple dashboarding, all the way up to situational awareness.
Could we,
Thank you.
We're running out of thanks. That was fast. All right, thanks a lot. Alan?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Arvind. And good evening to everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, folks in US and Europe. Hope everyone is doing fine, keeping safe and healthy. I'm Alind Agrawal. I'm a senior director in Manhattan Associates in our R&D department. I head the R&D for a few products of Manhattan Associates in India. I'm a graduate from IIT Kanpur. I have about 28 years of experience in this domain and in this area, and pretty much all the time I've been part of R&D groups in different companies, starting from Infosys, and then we had a startup called Yantra Corporation in supply chain domain for warehouse and order management products. And I was in US, Boston area, while in Yantra, and then I relocated back to India, and then a few acquisitions happened, Sterling Commerce and IBM. And then I moved out to Target, and I was helping them in their what is a modernization journey of order management. And then about 4 years back, I came to Manhattan, and I became part of Manhattan cloud journey, where we were taking Manhattan products to cloud. So that's a quick about myself. Yes, Arvind?
No, if you have a few
yeah, so quick few points about Manhattan Associate. I'll be really quick. We are a 30-plus-year-old company, technology company in the supply chain domain and omni-channel commerce, I would say. We are 12 times leaders in Gartner Magic Quadrants for warehouse management systems. We are also technology leaders in order management and transportation management system. We have customers, about 1,200 customers in different domains. I know, like retail, wholesale, consumer goods, food, beverages, pharma, third-party logistics, career, and all. And as I said before, we have been focusing on transforming our solutions for cloud journey. Last year in May, we have announced our fully cloud-native WM, which is warehouse management solution built on microservices architecture on GCP. And yeah, I see everyone raising their hands. Stop here, and we'll talk more. And in this session, I'm looking forward to sharing some of my perspective, more around the reimagining, I would say, planning and execution in supply chain domain for cold chain products.
Yeah, and Alan, my worry was more that you have gone into a lot of technology, microservices, etc. My chat guy will go all technical.
Okay. All right.
All right, Sid.
Sure. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. My name is Sid. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup called Statwig. What we do is basically we track every single product. For example, if you take vaccines, we track every single vial of vaccine right from the manufacturer all the way till the last mile, capturing its journey across multiple touch points in the supply chain, and recording essentially where it is, what condition it is in. And we leverage that data basically to solve some of the supply chain failures, primarily cold chain failures, stockouts, and issues like, to some extent, counterfeiting and black marketing of these products as well. So that's our solution is called Vaccine Ledger, by the way, and it has won, several awards from UNICEF Innovation Fund. We received funding a couple of times. We are World Economic Forum Global Innovator. We've been recently selected by Trinity Challenge as one of the winners. So we got good new funding, around 660,000 USD, which we are planning to use to help few countries in with their vaccine delivery programs. So if you guys know anyone who needs help with their vaccine delivery, we would be happy to partner and assist.
Yeah, thanks. Vijay, before I ask Vijay to start, most of you know him. Bosch DNA has been very active in helping startups. And one of the early times Bosch DNA was there when we ran a session with Nimble, which is the robotic single dish eating food, which had a very good experience with Bosch DNA. All right, Vijay.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind there. So my name is Vijay and I'm CIO for Bosch Group. So last 1.5 years, I'm in Stuttgart. So right now in Stuttgart. Before this, I was running the engineering captive center of Bosch, which is a big one in Bangalore. So I think we live in an era today where a whole lot of stuff is possible due to technology. In fact, that's the right time to live in because technical solutions of all challenges are feasible. At the same time, while I said that, we need to have balance in this, right? So we have, on one hand, you can buy blueberries in September in Stuttgart, and I wonder where do they come from because that's not the season, or strawberries in September, October. And then you start wondering that we are really spoiling the footprint, the carbon footprint on Earth by doing so, if it comes from South America, because that's where it's the right season. And this is something we need to take it in a balance. So while technology solves all the problem, it doesn't mean we create the problem of carbon footprint in the end. So therefore, a pragmatic solution and a balanced solution is all we need to go for, and as it exists. So thank you so much, Arvind. I'll give it to you quickly, saving some time.
Thank you. And I must thank my panelists for sticking to a very scripted time and doing it. But that's helpful. Thanks. And in the chat window, you guys, I noticed you're making some comments. Observations are fine, but if you have questions, just mark them questions so it's easier for me to find out. I will start with the first question. How do you reduce wastage? And it is lots of issues. You have refrigerated stuff. They have to be moved in, moved out. The driver may stop the refrigerated van if he has to wait for a checkpoint for a long while. In the hospital, in the final supply chain, also there may be issues. And also consumers may also create waste because they may not worry about quality, they may not worry about this. And there are lots of different people. So I would like to request Reinhold and Shivkumar to talk a little bit about it. Let's start with Mr. Reinhold. Reinhold, could you just talk about how do we reduce wastage or quality loss? The goal I just imagined was 50%, but go ahead.
So I'm not sure if he's in because he's getting dropped off and I have nothing to do with it while I'm the IT guy. Shiv Kumar, maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, sir. I know. Good.
Great. Yeah, I was kicked off several times, but in the moment it works. Sorry. So when you dramatically want to reduce the loss or the waste there in this supply chain, you first of all have to know where really happened. Does it happen? Where does this cool chain is too warm or whatsoever? So you have no other solution than putting sensors in and track the whole thing digitally and make it really possible that it is all the time sufficiently cooled. And that sounds very easy, but it's in fact quite complicated. It starts with trailers of trucks that have no electricity when they are decoupled from the truck, and have probably old diesel cooling sets that are forbidden in a few years in some countries, and so on. So you need a lot of new pure mechanical solutions, and you need a lot of new digital solutions, or at least increase the digital solutions dramatically, that you really have the appropriate data from all of these supplies, where it is too warm, where it is sufficiently cold, and so on and so on. I think that would be the first approach to really tackle the waste. On the other hand, some huge logistic companies try to solve that by doing everything by themselves, because they want to have the whole quality chain as well under their control. But no big company can be absolutely good in all items. We know this from Bosch as well. As it is in logistics everywhere, the cool chain will be as well a cooperation of lots of subcontractors finally, and as well a high quality cool chain will be such a cooperation. And then you really have to deal with how to handle these huge data pool of all these track and trace data and coolant data, and who gets really access to that, and how do the consumer finally has access to that, and there we have to find solutions where we have collaborative data pools, where we have flexible contracts or contacts to these data, and so on and so on, that will be not handled by one central initiative of one company from our point of view.
All right. You have just laid out something, and I'm going to now put Mr. Shivkumar in a little difficult situation. But coming to the issue of wastage, you can also think of it as outliers and other things. So is there a technology solution? Is there a way Microsoft can help people with sensors, data, quality, especially connecting across silos, etc.? How could your organization and the technology which Microsoft brings to the table help in spotting, which was the question Ryan last? We should know where the wastage is. And one of the interesting things I find is none of the people I talk to admit that they have wastage in there. Wastage is always somewhere else, but it is definitely happening. So, Shivkumar.
Yeah, look, I think when you look at outliers, you're talking about sort of anomaly detection or some specific risk that you're trying to identify, and that comes out of understanding situational awareness, understanding health, and understanding context in a very rich way, and being able to then say when something is out of place, out of time, out of synchronization, or out of collaboration, right? So it starts with having fine-grained, like we talked about different types of sensors. Now with the lower and lower cost of sensors, you can afford to have much more richer sensors. We thought of sensors as just time series or measuring only one variable, but now you have a much more richer pool of sensors in situ. You can have videos of what's going on, and you don't necessarily have to bring all the videos back. Out of that, the processing AI analytics can actually go to the edge, and all of this can be offered as a service. So the investment cost and the management costs of this are becoming more and more easily managed through cloud services. So the cloud does not necessarily mean somewhere in the clouds literally, but the cloud is actually coming to you, and many of these edge components are managed in a secure way. And also the development lifecycle of, if you develop an AI algorithm or a capability, you can as easily run it in the hyperscaler cloud, or you can actually push it down and run it at the edge. So these offer quite powerful ways of managing things. So what it means is increasingly what you think of as super expensive today is not going to be super expensive tomorrow, right? You should always think forward that the costs are going to come down and skate where the puck is going to be, because the technology world is continuously deflating away some of these costs.
Yeah, I may add some sparkle to this by asking Pavnesh, who in the introduction gave us a warning that he's he is not very convinced technology is a solution.
Of course.
Obviously, any cross question or suggestions to this group on how to reduce
Both
waste?
the speakers gave reasons for it because both focused largely on cooling. Understand where the food loss happens.
Yeah.
There's a lot of packaging issues, a lot of impact injuries. There are rejects because of selection process. While all of us want to stand out from the other, we want our children to stand out from the other. The selection, I'm not talking this last piece is the behavioral aspect, where we want all our tomatoes to look the same, all our bananas to look the same, which is a product of biology. Why can't we start accepting that produce of nature can also be different? But jokes apart, if you as the country gets more affluent, as the world gets more affluent, it starts moving towards fresh whole food. Fresh whole food is the chilled and mild chilled segment. It's fresh whole because it's living and breathing. So while we're looking at technology to only monitor cooling, little realizing that the mangoes that you're transporting, if you put them in a sealed container like you do a vaccine, is going to die not because of lack of cooling, but because of lack of fresh air.
Yeah.
Then there are certain cumulative aspects to it. While ice cream will melt and show the effect right away, some of the quality losses and the value losses happen because of some other ramification. So the supply chain has to understand the impact of every activity and then deploy sensors, not to detect when and where it happens, but to advise it has happened. There is still, instead of expecting a 7-day marketable life, it has now reduced to 4, divert to another location. So it has to be very dynamic. Cold chain has been monitoring this for donkeys of years, has been doing it. Technology can help facilitate, but technology itself, without understanding the entire gamut, a system-wide approach, is not going to do the job. It will be a Cobra effect. It will be a single-order solution. Second-order impacts will be ignored.
Yeah. So just to summarize, you talked about being more granular. What is being selected, what is being supplied, how it is packaged, and how it is done across the whole chain is a level of detail we need to worry about, but we'll come back. We will come back. Rainan sir, if you have anything to add, otherwise I will move to the next question. Would that be fine?
It's fine.
All right. Now let's go to the next question is, how do we reduce lead times to deliver by 30 to 50? And this is tiered storage, warehouses of different size, types of containers. Is there a role for drones, robots? Can casual workers like Danju come and pick something and deliver somewhere? And what if you're doing in rural areas, panchayats, villages? So for this type of question, let me turn to Alind, and then I will ask Sid. Alind.
Sure. Thank you, Arvind. And good afternoon, good evening once again to everyone. So in the beginning of this session, I heard saying next day delivery and consumers being more demanding and all. But I think as a consumer, we are just seeing the one side of the supply chain, which is from the order, when I'm placing the order versus it gets delivered at my door or step, which 24 hours or next day. But that's not the supply chain actually. So it means that it has come to a point, it's from where it can be the product, whichever product, whether it's a cold chain or not, it can be delivered to the end consumer. But when we are talking about whole supply chain here, and I'll take the example of vaccine. So if you think about a vial of vaccine, a vial of vaccine in its journey from manufacturing plant to the receiver is what we are talking about here. And that's not 24 hours, that's not next day delivery, right? So a vial of vaccine in its journey from, I'd say from manufacturing plant to the receiver gets stored in 4 to 5 locations, maybe sometime more, which are like distribution centers, PHCs, hospitals, all sort of that. And it gets transported also as many times by different carriers in different containers too. And in this journey, it gets unpacked and repacked a few times. So that's what is the supply chain we are talking about. It's a long journey. It's much more than the lead time, which we are talking about, getting into hands. And this long journey, I would say, impacts 2 things. Our ability to serve the high demand, which is coming in vaccines now, at least in India, 2 billion doses are needed. And also because the recommended temperature has to be maintained end to end, this long journey increases the operational cost, and also sometimes increases wastage. I hear Pawnesh, it's not the only reason, but sometimes, right? So this is the focus which I thought I'll provide some more perspective here. So from reimagining supply chain perspective, the planning and execution part, and that's where I'm going to focus here. Planning and execution in the supply chain need to be reimagined for reducing the holding time and the travel time. So basically the storage and transport is what is my focus here, and how we reimagine planning and execution in supply chain for reducing or optimizing the holding time and the travel time. So if you think more, and if you go a little bit wild here, maybe there needs to be some sort of green corridor maintained in the end-to-end supply chain, in the end-to-end supply chain for vaccines, at least for the vaccines which are in high demand. So that's the focus I'm looking at. And now talking about warehousing, where my expertise are, which is on the storage side of this supply chain. Today, if you look at the planning and execution, which happens in the four walls of the warehouse, which can be a distribution center or which can be anything, is focused on productivity, predictability, efficiency, and accuracy. Most of the automation which is there in the warehouse for planning and execution are focused on these four, which means we want to maximize the number of units shipped in a day from a warehouse. The automations need. Yes, Arvind, I see your hand here. So we'll come down to that. But what I was trying to come to is that when you're talking about green corridor, there's some sort of green corridor we need to imagine within the warehouse also, so that the holding time in the warehouse is minimized.
All right. I'll come back to that green corridor that applies more to urban areas. Sid, can we talk about your issues? Because you deal with a lot of cross-border paper permissions, shipment to countries where the basic transportation may be even less than India has. So how do you speed up delivery? And for your stuff, which is vaccines, etc., delivery speed is a lot more important. Go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, it's actually both a business problem and also the supply chain problem. So it starts right from the procurements. So the procurement of something like vaccine is quite different from how other products are procured. So these are annual contracts. Basically, the manufacturer starts preparing a batch against a purchase order, and they deliver it, they align everything supply chain according to it. They shift all the liabilities to a third-party logistics and who takes care of delivering the product. So there's a lot. It's a very complex nature of the supply chains. If you just take vaccines as an example, so I mean, most of them are manufactured here in India, but we're dealing with a global supply chain now. Manufacturers don't take the product and they take it to a different country. So there's usually 3PLs who take care of that. They take it to the nearest airport, ship it to the other country. There's the verifications that's happening at several touch points in the supply chain to ensure that the product is in both good quality, it's safe. And then from there it goes to a central location in that country. From there it goes to different regions, and then it trickles down to PHC, CSC. So it's a very long, very complicated supply chain. All of it is based on who is placing the orders, who is requesting more vaccines. So the supply chain basically navigates based on that. So in this very complex supply chain, there's a lot of opportunities where you can reduce the time it takes by doing simple things like, I mean, for example, queuing, at the airport. So some of the airports don't have queuing mechanisms. So all the trucks arrive at the same spot. They wait for 3 docking stations. It's a long line, inefficient. So even if you reduce that piece, you save probably a couple of hours there. So in terms of the overall lead time. So there's several things that you could do, but comparing a B2C e-commerce supply chain, which primarily depends on, hey, I know the customer behavior. I know when this person is going to order his next pair of t-shirt or socks, and I know when and where to keep those socks available so that I can get to him in the next couple of days, is very different from something like public health supply chains or public distribution supply chains, where you're dealing with very large populations and very unpredictable demand and supplies.
Thanks, Sid. Anything else? Otherwise, I would like to rephrase. The question was, how do we reduce? And I think both of you have given some clues like queuing, etc. But I would ask Vijay, because as an overall perspective in a multi-server, multi-queue system, etc., how do you go around cutting lead times by 40-50%? Any observation, comments? Vijay.
Sure. So I think a couple of things that I observed, even to reflect on the first question, the answer to the first question. So we talked of, you said we need to get granular on, what kind of tomatoes are transported and therefore what temperatures are required, or what so get down to the next level of detail. But I think the fundamental question even there we need to ask is, in the longer run, because these are all short-term solutions because they do exist. And when we want to cut down carbon footprint by 50% in the world, it's very likely that we will have to grow our own tomatoes. There's no way of transporting tomatoes in cold chain. So this is the reality of life. We have to start getting used to it, because this is not an emergency product and it will not get transported through cold chain. Let's take as a possibility that we look at what needs to be, or there's a heavy surcharge that only kings can afford, then a transported cold tomato from somewhere, something like this. The other dimension I want to point out is the storage capacity, the cold chain capacity today. How do we aggregate and find out today in Bangalore or wherever? I think all of us are in different parts of the world, or in Stuttgart where I'm right now. What's the capacity? How much can I really take? Is there a way to find that out together? Because this aspect of, while on one hand we say data, we say cloud, we say technology availability, on the other hand there's a collaboration, and that's where we miss out. How do we get data collaboratively that the vaccines, as Sid was talking about, which are not a B2C item, which are not kept in stocks, which need to move fast, there needs to be better planning. But when we say they need to move fast, how do we know what's the capacity available? At minus 70 degrees, some of the vaccines are shipped. And that's how do we get this data, which is more collaborative on one hand. On the other hand, it needs to be fed to a large set of let's say distributors, or let's say a large set of ecosystem players. So on one hand, gather the data, on the other hand, distribute it. And this is really tough. These are 2 points I just highlighted there.
No, I agree. And it's a lot about silos and a lot of stakeholders, a lot of things. And people may not even be collecting the data, may not consider it important, or may consider it too important to share. And we will find
yes, exactly. If data is oil, yeah, then I don't want to share it. Absolutely. And then the key there is the solutions like Gaia-X, which Europe is trying out. And maybe
and that's
over to you. But
that's part of the gamification and other things that has to come in. And about also getting drivers to see the benefit. They get paid quicker, faster if they do quality, etc. So we'll come back to that. But in the chat window, there's a lot of suggestion on how multimodal is important for India. And there's some questions. We'll come back to that. So keep going in the chat window. I will now turn to the largest question, which is how do we create capacity? Because it is expensive to have capacity which is not used. It's also expensive to have capacity which is purposed only for minus 40 degrees centigrade Moderna vaccine. It cannot be used for anything else. So you have to have multi-purpose, and utilization has to be high, not only when you deliver, when you are reverse taking, etc. Because unless you can convert the capex problem of large investment and railroads and buses, etc., to an OPEX problem, that the buyer is renting a small capacity and he can go from 1 to 10x at short notice and do, we really can't solve the problem. So with this, I will ask Pavneshwar to lead off, and then we will ask Alan to come at, and then we will ask to come at. Go ahead, Pavneshwar.
Your question is, how do we manage with surge volumes and capacity issues.
Yeah. And how do we make sure that it remains competitive in price and OPEX and CAPEX is managed? Somebody is investing for CAPEX, somebody pays the OPEX.
So all capacities, when they're planned, they have to be planned with a supply chain perspective. And the supply chain is, as very aptly put earlier, is about making sure you hold on to inventories the least. You can manage to do that when you have maximized your outreach to demand. If you're only building capacities to hold on to the goods, hoping for demand to reach to you, that's where issues happen. The other aspect about capacities is that we never look at, again, in the discussion also at times, I felt that we were again looking at the cold chain as a tool, as an enabler of the perishable supply chain, of the vaccine supply chain in silos. If you actually realize the sort of products you handle, vaccines have a 2 to 8 degree range. Any error, omission, machine failure has a 6-degree range for you to address it. Vaccines typically, say for example, we are talking about COVID. So Covishield has a lifespan of 9 months. But when you're handling something which has, say, milk, which is part of the cold chain system, say even bananas in the best of in the cold chain cannot survive, stay marketable, saleable for more than 28 days. So it's a matter of using the right technology tools to understand what needs to be pushed through. It's not about holding capacities, it's about throughput capacities, and what sort of synergies we build into utilizing the same capacities for other needs. If today is a COVID crisis, we can easily divert certain capacities in the existing food chain for vaccine distribution. Please, all of you should look at the WHO guidelines. In fact, it specifies also for Covishield, typical vaccine load for a village of say about 3,000, 5,000, 85% of our villages are less than 5,000 population. 3,000 vaccines come into a 1 foot by 8 inches by 10 inches box in its tertiary packaging, right? So that's not much of a capacity issue if you're talking about surge capacity for vaccines. If you're talking about surge capacities for food luckily is one thing which has more or less static capacities. Your demand varies by population growth. You have about 1.5%. In India, it's 0.9% population growth. That's many more mouths to feed, and production is ramping up at 4 or 5%. The issue is, how do you make, I love the idea of sustainability and SDGs and carbon footprints, which if you have a systems approach, you have to make sure that whatever resources and natural resources went to the back end come to gainful productivity. It's not productivity per mile, it's not productivity per field, it's productivity delivered. And hence you safeguarded resources. So capacity issues, I personally don't see so much of a problem when capacities are managed better. You spoke of the word silo. So look at what happens in a country. You have a separate cold chain for food, and you have a separate cold chain for medicine, also driven by secrecies and issues by healthcare providers. But there is great convergence and synergy over there. There's a concept called, say the food cold chain originates, say, at rural gate, at farm gate, with an aggregation hub where products have to be pre-conditioned, which means clean, short grade, pre-cooled, the first instance of cooling, right? They are managed locations. There are people who are manning it. You have energy source, cooling source, packaging sources, manpower, and some technology deployed there. Why? How much of space is required for that rural location, for those 10 villages around it, to have their vaccines stored there? Meanwhile, vaccines are planned. I disagree that there has to be very sudden supply of vaccines. Vaccinations are planned processes, right? You have sudden sporadic consumption of things like vaccines for COVID, like snake venom. You have, vaccines also required. Every vaccine center must have 3 anaphylactic injections. If one suddenly uses 1 in 100,000 or 400,000, that needs to be delivered quickly. So that's where you need surge delivery. On city levels, it's a different ball game, but you put up your hand. Ciao.
I'll come back. So you're saying it is less of surge demand as more planning and this thing. But let me come to Shankara. Any suggestions from a perspective of capacity addition, which you face a lot in your deliveries?
Absolutely. So I'm looking at it both from a business process perspective, sort of building on what Mr. Kohli said, and also looking at what technology tools can, or where they can help and how we can leverage them. Fundamentally, we need creative solutions. And when I say creative solutions end to end, we are talking about designing good networks in such a way that at different trigger points, we might need to make adjustments to the logistics operations that we have at hand. Let me explain that a little bit. Capacity is not just warehouse capacity. There's also capacity along the supply chain. If you're moving on a railroad, if you're moving along the truck lines, we want to make sure that if we are sending something, the load factors are appropriately high, and that in turn enhances our efficiencies and will bring down our costs as well. But more importantly, reliability comes at a high price. But this ability and this agility in tweaking our solutions to make sure that load factors are high, working with partners, and figuring out how we are going to do it all together is going to be pivotal in growing together. It's one thing to say we need to do it, and then figuring out the nuts and bolts of how we are actually going to do it. Having said that, another thing that we would want to look at is algorithms. I don't need to talk to you much about optimization, AI, ML, how we can solve forecasting, facility location, vehicle routing problems, and everything. But the challenge, as everybody has already mentioned, is data. Sharing data across silos is going to be tough. But if we design our operations and our overall business process in a proper manner, suitably incentivized individuals can be counted on to make the right decisions, even if they're manually made. And with the help of monitoring devices, IoT and the like, we can layer in consistency. And that is going to be very vital. And this was actually highlighted in a recent presentation by Alibaba, where they utilized a similar approach, developing a state-of-the-art graph neural networks and the like in machine learning, while they're leveraging those final mile delivery across their platform. It's not just one, delivering shrimp or lobster or something like that. They were doing medicines, they were doing everything together, and the same set of delivery drivers, they leverage across platforms. Of course, that's something that a large conglomerate has an advantage over, but it's something that we can definitely think about. One other aspect that I'd like to highlight is transporting perishables in a highly monitored environment is certainly possible over long distance, but it is fraught with expenses. Key to developing efficient supply chains will likely involve identifying good backhaul opportunities. So using an analogy from cricket, just like fast bowlers, initial success stories for cold chain are likely to come in pairs. Like one example, I was talking with one of my cousins is just like you need tomatoes going up to Kashmir, probably you need apples coming right back down. Something along those lines.
All right. Right. So you talked about CapEx utilization, and we talked about demand not being so uncertain. Shiv Kumarji, from your CapEx, OpEx of running Azure Microsoft perspective, any comments on this capacity provision and how to convert it financially to be attractive to both parties? In Azure, you can spin up Kubernetes, all that orchestration is all there. How do you do it with railroads and buses and trucks and different sizes, fishes and vaccine and deep fried? I mean, the whole range of things to orchestrate is unusual. Any insights from the way you run a large cloud server?
Yeah, look, I think first we should acknowledge that getting high degrees of utilizations or value out of digital platforms is very different from doing it in physical platforms, right? So I think if you take a computational platform, you can sort of create different avatars or views of it for different customers and use it dynamically. Whereas achieving the same amount of flexibility on physical platform, not just one, but a network of physical platforms, is quite a challenge, right? So I think I do hear the pain of some of the, my colleagues who have mentioned some of the challenges, right? So I think the issue is when you design the building blocks, design it as much with reusability in mind, design it as much with, it's not just the point efficiency, but also systemic efficiency. And like Pavnesh was mentioning, it is not about understanding just a sensor of cold storage, etc., but really how the entire throughput is managed, how the overall efficiency of the system is managed, and how you can use the same chain for multiple operations. So look, I think it's not like we have a magic bullet here. So I think the emergence of modular building blocks, modular platforms at every level of the logistics stack is important. And then the purpose of areas like cloud, data sharing, and so on is to enable orchestration, right? Real-time orchestration, just-in-time. All these are enablers. And also data syndication is much more easier on technologies like cloud. And of course, in some selected areas where Microsoft is participating, we try to combine edge-based platforms, or even in some cases, containerized data centers or small data centers that we send out to the edges to help orchestrate this as well, right? So these are some thoughts I would like to share, but I don't minimize the challenges that are.
Arvind, I have a question to you. If you ask, allow me to ask one.
Yeah.
So exactly was mentioned now on Microsoft. He said physical versus logical or data. Is there an opportunity for an orchestrator here, like an Ola?
I will come back. I'll come to that.
Okay.
I'll come to that. So the interesting question was, and you heard Pavnesh talk about the medicine and the food being completely different cold chains. And in fact, in the at IoT Forum, we have an agri-tech forum. We have seen a lot of cold chains don't even manage capacity. There's a lot of energy pumped in, -4, even though only 30% is used, or different types of goods are there. There is a startup which is doing off-chain. They take a 20-feet container and they run it off batteries, solar power, doesn't need grid. And there's a lot of intelligence to optimize use of power and manage it. So you can reduce cost and use very modular packaging. But the notion of modularizing a lot of things is physically not there. And it is something which may happen. It happened to shipping because the 20-feet container, the ISO containers came, and we have seen the exponential increase, and the prices have come down, and you have enormous aggregation. So the question is whether the cold chain supply, the refrigerated supply, has enough institutional pressure to completely reimagine a 1/3 reduction of cost, a half reduction in speed, and better quality reusability. And you mentioned, how can you, and there was a mention, you send mangoes and you take fisheries back. So utilization is much higher. But I'll come back to Vijay. So Vijay, if you reflect on all the things we heard, what things strike you as most powerful leverage, and where you did not see enough connection? We are missing the forest for the trees. We are seeing too much trees, we are missing the forest.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So basically, I go back to saying technologically things are solvable, and as was mentioned, there are also there are tools, there are technologies, then there are some providers. But I think we miss some of these aspects. One, which I was trying to ask you a question, we need an orchestrator of sorts. And when we have an orchestrator, we need policies of sort. We need orchestrators of sorts so that we are able to sort this problem out. So policies in terms of upgrading the technology. For instance, you can use only, this is the limit of CFCs that you can use. Or as you called out, is modularization is a policy of government, or it's a policy of the consortia that builds this together, and there are then specific modules of what size of containers are available and so on. So this needs to come in. And when you have an aggregator, the beauty is then the data is available. We were trying to see how can we get this data of, while Pavanesh says there's no challenge on capacity, I would still wonder how does something, even if it's as small as a tiny minus 70 degrees need to go to a village. The village has nothing. So I would still call it from that perspective, the capacity. It's not about having the capacity, it's having at the right time at the right place. And this data doesn't exist. And therefore, an aggregator in this system could help solve some of these aspects. That the aggregator has all the data and he has the ability to provide this data to the players, to the ecosystem players. The policies then the ecosystem could make for themselves, if not by the government. And the aspect of how do we then bring in a reimagined low-cost, high-speed, best quality solution, then is a feasibility. We need to have a concerted effort to bring that together. At the moment, it's happening in a little bit, haphazard or in pockets and not together. But I think Pavanesh is the right guy to answer whether that's so or not.
We will come back.
I totally agree with you. An aggregator is core to it all. In fact, at least in India, there was a proposal which has been accepted by the government, which is to create a value system platform, not value chain, value system platform. An aggregator is also important from perspective of bringing in transparency on that data flow. The very fact on a physical term, when you aggregate output from small fragmented suppliers, as in case of farms or even in the case of an assembly line in a factory, all of them assembled together get aggregated into a final product. So in the same way, an aggregator also is not just for forward aggregation, it's also for market linkage, which in my perspective means reverse flow of information. If you all recall, it was barely 15 years ago. If I had to go to the airport, Mr. Tiwari, I must finish this. Barely 15 years ago, if I had to catch a flight, I would go to the airport, then check the board there and then sit there for 6 hours because the flight was delayed. Today, there's an information and SMS which I can sit at home. It happens with Uber everywhere. But look at what happens in the cold chain. The source of the cold chain, I'm going back to the food items now. The farmer has to follow a push model because there is no aggregator there to inform him the railway is delayed or the truck has got a tire puncture, and he is safer not harvesting because you have a 15-day window to harvest it. The other aspect is when we talk about capacities and misuse of capacities, because when we leverage our capacities without having the economics in mind, the cold chain is not about bridging distances. It's about bridging price wedges. I'll go back to the tomato story. When Karnataka farmers were throwing tomatoes at 3 rupees a kilo, in the same 3-month period, in those same days, Delhi in a blind auction was buying them at a wholesale, so non-transparent auction at 30 rupees a kilo. There's no need for value addition to the product. There's value addition to the producer and to the system. And that's where we miss out. So our capacities, we must identify, stop looking at mini cold storages. They only defer the inevitable, they'll defer the delay. Look at how that buffers the supply chain. Any storage is a necessary evil to buffer the supply chain. The idea is always have a target market in mind. Always keep moving. Your capacities can come into use for another 3x production. Proviso, you are targeting all your solutions around delivering. Even in the stock market, every 28 days, there's a delivery cycle. But in the warehousing space, you just store it. Yeah. And you keep hedging your bets. That's the problem.
Okay, so let me try to summarize with 2 examples, case studies to bring up orchestration and incentives. One is an example which was discussed at one of the IoT Forum events where we talked about mango deliveries in Brazil, a lot of quality issues, and Accenture and Walmart were the participants. It was Walmart driving it. And how you got RFID, how you got farmers to be able to put data and track and trace for the mango and different sizes. They're not all the same. It was an interesting project. It has blockchain, etc. But it was difficult. And therefore, the success, which is more apparent, is what Alibaba has done with Canino. And this is a model which I would recommend needs a great deal of examination because they have approached the talent problem, the drivers, the people, and incentives and models. There are about 16 different measurements by which drivers get paid, or the loaders and cargo guys paid. Quality is one part of them. Doing their productivity is one part of them. But they have managed to produce a large number of self-employed volunteers who man the whole process, and they're delivering at scale, at speed. And there are also Pindangdao, which is group buying. I mean, China has an enormous model of group buying, which delivers at fractions of cost and speed. So there are ways of orchestrating, which may require less of a government central thing, but a large market player can start setting standards. But the important thing which gets missed out, it has to be the talent, that drivers, the stakeholders, the LSP providers. They need to get money. They need to get money fast. They need to see benefits first before the rest of the alignment will happen. That would be my observation, but I think this is a large issue. We have discussed many things. I think it is 7:40. It's time to look at some questions and comments. And I will come back and give each one of the panelists a final comments or observation there. Is that all right, Pavneshwar? Can I move to take questions from the audience? All right. Now, there are 2 or 3 things that have come. One is a question to Reinhold on edge and technology, etc. Reinhold, do you want to address that? What types of edge technology, sensors, quality are using? Is Reinhold there?
If not, I can answer on behalf of Bosch. So,
go ahead.
So Bosch has you can actually have a look at the BST. So Bosch Sensitech, it's a division of Bosch. They have their website, so you can have a look at the sensors. So Bosch does supply, as Reinhold was mentioning, we are the #1 suppliers of especially the the electromechanical sensors, the MEMS sensors that we talk about. And there are all kinds with all degrees of freedom in there, and they're fairly, interesting in terms of different usages that they provide. I mean, every phone that turns your image, I think every 4 out of the 5 phones is Bosch sensors, most likely the acceleration sensor. So have a look at that. There's a whole lot of that stuff. Or if you want to, I mean, I don't want to advertise Bosch, so I never. And there's a whole lot of stuff happening on what we do at Edge on our manufacturing plants and so on. So I would not get into that.
Okay, the next question comes from Vikram Sood. Can you shed light on role of purpose-built vehicles, trailers for efficiency management and travel? Is that Shankara or Pavneshwar?
Okay, whenever something is purpose-built, it has a huge advantage, but then it is for a specific purpose. So it also generates issues about return logistics. So normally I would recommend purpose-built systems for last mile, where there's one-way traffic. A simple example is when you have a purpose-built milk van as a tanker, it can only move milk one way. On the return node has to be empty. So this concept of taking one thing one way and coming back the other way doesn't help. Purpose-built from a larger aggregate level, where you say it's food safety, food safe materials and all, yes, definitely there's an advantage. Purpose-built from perspective of cooling, well, all reefer trucks, all reefer containers are purpose-built to service from -25 to +25. But on talking about trucks, Tiwari, you don't mind, but I don't think we should talk about drivers shutting off systems. Gone are those days where the prime engine is the driver of the cooling. They're separate units. Driver can switch off his engine, but that thing continues. And a simple technology solution, if somebody does that, is to remove that control from him. So it's not that. Actually, if you do talk to drivers who do have this method of switching off, they'll tell you that it's their owners, the LSPs, who ask them to do it if there's too long a delay, or because the client has not paid them 2 freight loads. So to pressurize the client, they switch it off. So the various other issues there. I think drivers are just doing a job. On the fact about using purpose-built vehicles for long haul, I would feel a little uneasy about it. A whole agenda is to create rural driver entrepreneurs who have a reason to go back to their homes, and hence they need not carry cool stuff. All your shampoos, all your pouches of coffee, all your various other things rural India thrives on, and the FMCG groups cannot ignore rural India. They can come back in a reefer thing, and you can move forward with cold chain and come back with other things. It's all about targeting the right price point. Cold chain as an intervention for the same ecosystem is of no use.
All right, we will take one last question and then we'll come back, which is from Anjali. Is the cost of putting better quality, monitoring, etc., less than wastage or is it higher? So that's a business cost. Anyone has a feel? Because it has not been done. So the assumption is probably it costs more than you save.
It depends on the, okay, I can answer that. We have worked with several supply chains, several products. All products are priced at different has different value. So for a high value product, oncology drugs as an example, so you could have a fancy sensor tracking it, collecting data, and the cost will still be justifiable. For vaccines are at $1 a piece average price. I'm not talking about COVID-19 vaccines, but vaccines in general, polio vaccines, other vaccines, because the cost right now is high, but for COVID-19 vaccines also, it will go down over a couple of years. So the solution, I mean, like having IoT and other technologies still makes sense, but at a pallet level maybe. So if you have 5,000 vials of vaccine in a pallet, you can still monitor it using tech. So it, yeah, I mean, cost plays a major role.
Fair enough, sense. Fair enough. Pavnesh.
Yeah, so remember what he said, if there is something of higher value, it justifies. Now, I beg to say, value is a social, a cultural construct. Price is a manifestation of demand and supply. Today, we even value air, right? So again, the same example, instead of growing tomatoes yourself, the same tomato, 3 rupee thing, if it's communicated at a cost, cold chain cost of just 10.5 rupees. Yeah, because a 10-tonner truck costs about 85,000 rupees to move from Bangalore to Delhi. So it's 8.5 rupees a kg on the 3 rupee tomato, another 2.5 rupees for other cold chain practices. That tomato would fetch 30 rupees in a blind auction.
Yeah.
So that value justifies any other, because look at a 1,000% price difference from source to terminal market. So if you target your business properly and have benefits out of it, you will definitely use better data, you'll use blockchain, you'll use everything, because everything else is additional savings besides the opportunity market provides.
All right.
Value is notional.
Perfect. We are out of time, so I will have to take a cut, and I hope none of you have any urgent things to mention. So I will just summarize. There are many factors. There are many different goods, services, use cases. But as Pavnesh has emphasized, start from end consumers' value delivery and work backward. You will probably do a better job of solving the alignment, the data, the technology, the quality to achieve that. Otherwise, if you start from the supply, unlike the farmer doesn't know, all this start because you are not starting from the 30 rupees in Delhi, how to solve that. And it's not about ED raising warehouses, fellows and other crooks who are making money. It's about information flow, visibility, and better quality to transport or store if necessary and make that happen. So a lot of granular measurement, etc., opportunities arise. I hope with that summary, we can close the issue. I will hand over to Vijeta or Vin, and I think thanks you a lot for an interesting session, and thanks to the audience for holding on and asking questions. Yeah, Vijeta. Vinay.
Thank you, everyone. We will keep you posted on the links and the takeaways. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, panelists.